This is ContactTalkRadio.com. Consciousness in action. And you are taking action into your consciousness by tuning into Contact Talk Radio.
And on TuneIn.com, Ping.fm, and UpSnap Mobile.
Contact Talk Radio.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book of stars. Open up the
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking. I'm your host, Sherry Horn Hassan of Karmic Evolution Astrology, and I'm coming to you on June 9th, 2022 from Contact Talk Radio. Just a quick reminder that this show aims to bring you the truth about astrology and your soul's karmic evolution. Today, I'm very pleased to announce that my guest is professional astrologer, author, and lecturer Bruce Scofield, who I will, of course, be introducing properly in just a few minutes. First, my usual housekeeping stuff, which is you can listen to this show or this podcast anytime by simply going to my website at karmicevolution.com and clicking on the upper right-hand portion of the banner labeled podcast. From there, you can scroll down the page and you can hear the most recent show, either live or recorded, and or search the archived listings for past shows that you might have missed or ones to which you'd like to listen again. Separately, please feel free to follow me on my Facebook page, which is Karmic Evolution for Your Soul. Now, I have two or three announcements to make before we get into the Astro news you can use. The first is that I will be giving an workshop on June 25th for the Astrological Society of Princeton, and the title of the workshop is I Can't Get No Karmic Relief, or Can I? And here is the description in a nutshell. Want to know how to delineate a chart from the evolutionary perspective, meaning how to discern the true purpose of a soul's journey through this lifetime based on both early and past life experiences? This 4-hour workshop with me, Sherry Horn Hassan of Karmic Evolution Astrology, will teach you just that, along with how to define the soul lessons any particular individual has incarnated or reincarnated into this lifetime to learn. Now, the first part of this workshop will illustrate how to read a chart from the evolutionary point of view, meaning through the lens of the nodal structure by sign and house, nodal ruling planets, and aspects to and from these ruling planets, as well as aspects to and from the nodes by other planets, major asteroids, and or sensitive chart points. The second part of this workshop will be devoted to looking at participants' charts to help them better understand their individual hero's journey through this lifetime, and to learn what tripped you up, what vexed you, or otherwise prevented you, either or both early in this lifetime or in past lives, from achieving your real soul's purpose or your real goals. In short, what created the karma into which you were born into this lifetime, and how can you better understand how such past soul conditioning became embedded in the psyche, allowing the unconscious oftentimes to run the show now? What if we expanded our knowledge to better understand that much of what we call karma was created through circumstances often beyond our control? This workshop will focus on how we can decide to make different choices from these habitual soul conditioned patterns as we move forward in our future. So choices, again, not based on habitual karmic soul conditioning, but rather on creating new future karma through conscious choice based on such astrological insight. So I hope that you guys will join me. The actual workshop is on Saturday, June 25th, and you can go to aspnj.com to sign up. It is $30 for Astrological Society of Princeton members and $50 for non-members. And if you'd like your chart data to be included in the workshop, please shoot me an email at Sherry, that's SHERI, at karmicevolution.com. And I will collect the chart data and choose who to use for the second half of the workshop. Now, also, I'm continuing to offer my 1-hour discounted Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for listeners only for $99. And this reading is for those of you who are interested in astrology and want to learn more about the true meaning of your individual birth chart or your natal horoscope. Essentially a snapshot of the exact position of the planets at the precise moment and location of your birth. Your horoscope reveals a great deal about you, and when used as a tool for soul growth, it can lead to being tremendously helpful for learning your soul's true purpose and how to move forward towards your highest destiny in this lifetime. It can reveal patterns of behavior that originated early in life or during past lives, as I mentioned before, that affect your current relationships, your career choices, your finances, and or your health, but that no longer serve your soul's karmic journey moving forward. It can also provide you insights into what tripped you up in the past and how to entertain new perspectives and gain greater awareness through astrological insight that brings greater happiness and ultimately satisfaction into your life. So all this is easy when you take advantage of my 1-hour discounted Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for only $99. Again, you can simply email me at Sherry, SHERI, at karmicevolution.com, and we'll get your reading scheduled as soon as possible. At almost half the regular price, conscious awareness has never been so easy or so affordable. Okay, so let's get into this week's Astro news you can use. And I'm going to try to be as brief as possible. So I do want to give my guest as much time as possible so that I don't, hog up all of the interview time. So let's start out this week just by remembering that the May 30th Gemini moon monthly lunar cycle is waxing now, and that new moon asked us to plant seeds that allow us to not only ask questions, but to listen to the answers to those questions with the intent to learn something new. Now, our curiosity should allow us to be open to processing the information we receive so that we can build upon what we learn as we go to increase our knowledge, which eventually will lead to true wisdom. I thought it was interesting to note that on June 7th, which is when the waxing first quarter Virgo moon squared the Gemini sun, which is almost a full week before the June 14th Sagittarius upcoming full moon, Matthew McConaughey, an actor who happens to have been born in Uvalde, Texas, the same local town where the recent massacre of 19 children and 2 teachers occurred at the hands of a deranged 18-year-old with an AR-15 rifle and tons of ammunition. Matthew McConaughey gave a speech from the bully pulpit of the White House press podium. And from there, he advocated stronger background checks, red flag laws, raising the minimum age for the purchase of assault weapons, and more. And here is what part of what he said, which I think is interesting to repeat in the context of our current astrological energies. Now, some of this is paraphrased and some quoted directly, so I'm not going to claim complete and total accuracy here, but I took it down as closely as I could when I was watching the live presentation. He said, "We're not as divided as we're being told we are." And remember, Gemini is an archetype of duality. And he went on to say, "We need to set an example for our children," Gemini's young people, especially those in the early grades, by watching our great American leaders here. Let's admit it. We can't truly be effective if we're only living for re-election. Let's be knowledgeable and wise, Sagittarius, and lead with humility. We got to make choices. We got to embrace new ideas and preserve the conditions that make true progress for the next generation. Uranus and Taurus, and the pending square again by Saturn, right? The conflict between embracing those new ideas and staying with the old ones. Let's start giving all of us good leadership and prove the American dream is not an illusion. And he went on to say, we start by making the right choices, by making laws that save innocent lives and don't infringe on our Second Amendment rights. We start by giving, and here he named one of the children, the deceased children about whom he just spoken, give her the chance to be spoiled by her dad, give another child the chance to become a marine biologist, which she had said she was aiming for. Give Ellie the chance to read her Bible verse at the Wednesday night service, which she had just said she was going to do. And Irma and Joe, Irma was one of the teachers. Joe was the husband who had a heart attack upon finding out that she had died a day or two later. Give them the chance to finish painting their house and maybe get that food truck someday. We start by giving all of them the promise that their dreams are not going to be forgotten. We start by making the loss of these lives matter. So I thought that was particularly interesting as Mercury in Taurus waxes into his third trine to Pluto on June 10th. And as we approach tonight's January 6th committee's first primetime hearing, in large part because we're under the auspices still, as I said, the waxing Gemini new moon, which again asks us to listen and understand what matters most about what we hear. The Mercury-Pluto trine theoretically allows us to more easily understand that we can get to the bottom of the deeper meaning of what we're hearing and what we're listening to. And this may also spark some shocks and surprises along the way among those who are paying attention as Venus conjoins Uranus in Taurus on June 11th. So that energy is waxing now too. And remember, one of mutable Gemini's downside energies is its lack of focus. So we want to pay attention to what may sound shocking or surprising at first, because we want to really understand what's most important without simply trivializing it or arguing about it, which is going on right now on, Facebook and all the social media platforms. Just take a peek if you haven't. So by June 11th, we have Mercury re-entering Gemini, where he'll remain until July 4th. As we engage in northern hemisphere, warmer weather outdoor social activities to which we may travel locally or maybe a little farther, such as graduations, weddings, parties, picnics with our family, our friends, our neighbors, lots of talking, lots of passing of information and perspectives and opinions during this time, which may or may not lead to arguments. But we'll leave that discussion till Mars enters Gemini in August, leading up to the tightening of the Saturn-Uranus square by end September and midterm elections here in the U.S. during the next set of eclipses. Now, June 14th brings the Sagittarius full moon, which arrives at 23 degrees and 24 minutes of the Sag-Gemini polarity at 4:32 a.m. Pacific time and 7:32 a.m. Eastern time. And this lunation has the Sag moon asking the Gemini sun to release any tendency towards staying mired in meaningless, disconnected, superficial information, and instead to expand its consciousness toward better, expanding itself towards better understanding the bigger picture. Now, Gemini is an archetype that loves to collect and pass information. However, it's not concerned with processing the data it collects into any meaningful form. The Sag moon reminds the Gemini sun that disjointed bits and pieces of information carry far less overall meaning than, combining all this collected data into a whole. So Gemini is far more prone to lacking an understanding of where it's going as it wanders through neighborhoods, drives through local towns, stops to chat here and there. While this archetype fills itself with new and different perceptions daily, often what it lacks is the ability to pull its perceptions together into a meaningful theme. The Sag moon reflects the Gemini sun's light back to itself to illuminate the fact that wandering aimlessly down every byway and highway becomes tantamount to losing one's mental ability to focus on the ultimate destination. And what's that destination? Higher knowledge, greater consciousness, expanded understanding of one's life and role within the larger world. We are all human specks in the great design of the cosmos, but Sag reminds Gemini that there is a larger cosmos and we all form a part of the pattern within it. So the Sag moon reminds the Gemini sun that also that not everything is explainable in concrete terms. Sometimes it's okay to believe metaphysical concepts, for example, that lack physical or empirical proof. And that's because the universe often speaks to us in symbols rather than words. The trick at this Sagittarius full moon, however, lies in the fact that both the Gemini sun and the Sag moon are making mutable squares to Neptune, the planet of illusion, confusion, and delusion in Pisces. The tendency, therefore, exists at this time to retreat into escapism rather than face reality as it is. Disputes about what defines reality are likely to crop up now since the Gemini sun possesses so many different perspectives that it often cannot truly know which one is most accurate or which one holds the most meaning. So it's only when we let go of any pie in the sky, unrealistic fantasies that we begin to find practical solutions to life's problems that might actually work. But always we must keep the bigger picture in mind. The Gemini sun's trine and the Sag moon's sextile to Saturn and Aquarius at this lunation, and Saturn is retrograde, that steadies us a bit, because we can be a bit more disciplined with our thought processes and open to learning new facts, or more easily open to learning new facts with the sun's trine to Saturn, and more inclined towards seizing opportunities to emotionally reflect on what we hear now rather than simply dismiss it frivolously, as inconsequential with that sextile. Now, the sun perfects its airy trine to Saturn June 16th, while it perfects its square to Neptune a few hours later that day, too. Now, life is always a matter of choice. So it's up to each of us which energy we want to consciously favor, which is good because Sagittarius is normally not a halfway kind of archetype. He's all in or nothing, as he loves adventure, gambling, and living life to its fullest. At this lunation, he invites the Gemini moon to get out of its rut, to stop wandering round and round that mental and metaphorical labyrinth, and to figure out where he actually wants to go. In the end, he reminds the Gemini sun, yes, the journey can be sparked by curiosity, filled with new people and places. But what good is it if we don't learn something from it that helps us and helps us to recognize cognitively that what we've learned in the end is meant to help us grow in consciousness. Okay, so now it's time to introduce my guest. Bruce Scofield holds an MA in history and a PhD in geosciences and has taught at the University of Massachusetts and online for Kepler College. He has professional astrological certifications from AFA and NCGR and maintained a private practice as an astrological consultant, writer, and conference speaker for 45 years. The author of 8 books and hundreds of articles on astrology, he served on the education committee of NCGR and the PAA board as a member or director since 1979. Together with astrologer Barry Orr, they maintain a website at OneReed, that's OneReed.com, that contains a variety of astrology articles and an online calculation program on Mesoamerican or Mayan and Aztec astrology. Now, I want to mention also that Bruce is giving a lecture on the same topic that was advertised for this interview, which is on June 12th, which is Sunday of this weekend at 2 p.m., and it's called The Natural Astrology of Climate Change. So the description of that is natural astrology is concerned with the dynamics of the Earth, weather, and climate systems, how the solar system affects them, and how their variations then affect the land, the seas, agriculture, populations, and the biosphere in general. Bruce will focus on the primary astronomical drivers of climate change. orbital cycles and solar cycles, long-term cycles driven by the planets. From this perspective, climate variations on Earth are part of a multi-linked chain of astronomical causes. Based on this broad view of how climate changes occur naturally over time, Bruce will comment on how these changes are being modified by human activity and what are the consequences. So if you want more information and you'd like to sign up, and that lecture, I believe, is $5 for ASP members and $20 for non-members, you can just go to aspnj.org. All right. So, Bruce, welcome. How are you today?
I'm still here. I'm hanging in.
And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. So tell me, let's get right into it. I probably talked too long and I apologize, but I got a kind of saggy ninth house sun. So what astrological factors, you mentioned some of this general stuff, what contribute to climate change, or how do you approach this in terms of looking at the sky?
Well, first of all, we have to decide what's astrology and what's not.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go back to Ptolemy, we're talking 150, AD, Common Era. He said there were two main branches of astrology, and one dealt with the natural world, and one deals with people.
Mm-hmm.
And so the people would be, natal horoscopes would be horary charts, horary readings and electional readings and so on. But that was called, we call that natal astrology today.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be called genethliological, genetic, the root word there. Anyway.
Right, like genealogy?
Yeah. The branch called natural astrology, and used to be called, Ptolemy called it universal astrology. He saw it as things that had to do with the weather, the seasons,
Mm-hmm.
agriculture, had applications in agriculture, affected, things like plague, floods, drought periods, earthquake, and also the effects on large human populations like cities and countries, nations, states, things like that. Now, today, a lot of that is subsumed under the title mundane astrology. That's kind of what we call it today, but it was universal or natural astrology. So what I'm getting at is that, well, if there is a natural astrology, and there's a long tradition in astrology, anybody who studies the history will say, oh yeah, that's started real early and kept going. Then we could say things like the tides and the seasons are actually a kind of astrology, right?
Right.
So weather is a system. Weather is the temperature and precipitation and wind and all these things acting on each other, and complex interactions producing very difficult to predict effects. But it's a system. There's a lot happening, and astrology measures systems. Everything that astrology does or measures is a system. It does not apply to a plank of wood or a rock, or something that's just a solid mass.
So you're talking about animate versus inanimate? Is that what you mean?
Well, animate in the sense that it is moving. A system is always something that's evolving and changing, and the definition of evolution is change over time.
Right.
The standard definition of evolution does not imply that things are getting better. They could get worse. They just change over time. The rock band Devo in the 80s brought an important message to their listenership, and that was that there is such a thing as de-evolution. And there was in the 80s. There was a considerable amount of de-evolution in the 80s, at least politically. But the point I'm trying to get at is that the weather is a system, and so is climate. Except climate is like weather, except it's on a much, much bigger scale, and it's hard for people to wrap their heads around it. We're talking hundreds of thousands of years, if not millions of years. That's way, way beyond an individual lifespan. but things go on in that over time.
Mm-hmm.
And things are relative in a sense. There's if you're taking a microscopic view, you're going to see weather. If you're taking a much broader view, you're dealing with climate.
Right.
And in both cases, there are clear effects from solar system bodies, largely the sun.
Mm-hmm.
The sun is heating the earth. It's heating the atmosphere, heating the oceans, causing winds, causing water to evaporate and precipitation. And we also know that the moon has an effect. The moon, pulls the tides, pulls the earth as well. But there are correlations between rainfall and the moon. For example, it's known that about 5 days after full moon and 5 days after full moon are the points in the lunar month that where the greatest likelihood of major rainfalls occur. And this has been studied and reported in scientific journals. In fact, top scientific journals. So this is
wow.
not a joke.
Now you said after 5 days after a full moon. Did you mean a new moon too?
Yeah, new moon, full moon.
So 5 days after the new moon and 5 days after the full moon. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, and this was actually discovered by John Goad, who wrote a book on astrometeorology in the 17th century, and he did a study. This was before instrumentation. But he did a study and found out that he called it the first sextile and the second sextile.
Mm-hmm.
Or actually would be the first sextile after the new moon, and it would be the beginning of the third trine, which occurs after the full moon.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
So those points. And a sextile is 60 degrees, and it takes about 5 or 6 days for the moon to get, to make a sextile.
Right. Right.
So that's the idea. So that's one thing, but there are other things, correlations between the moon and lightning, storms and so on. There's just a lot. And as you know, there's a tradition called astrometeorology.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes way back to the origins of astrology. And in that branch of astrology, we see things like, for example, charts cast for the passage of the sun in, over the vernal equinox. And from that, a determination of the weather for the next quarter.
Right, which was instrumental for them for the areas, especially in Western astrology, right, to grow crops and whether there'd be a drought or the Nile was going to overflow and things like that, right?
Yeah, I bring that up because most people in astrology think that astrology is all charts, and that if you try to step away from that, some kind of cognitive dissonance, starts up and you've got a problem. But there's
right.
There's a whole other side of astrology that just has to do with analyzing cycles, and that goes way back too. They're called revolutions. So astrology is not just charts, and it's not just people. That's my point.
Right. Well, a lot of that came about
in your head.
A lot of that came about with the advent of depth psychology in the late 1800s and Jung and all of that. Prior to that, no individuals had astrologers unless they were kings or prominent people, right? And then because the whole point was the astrologer was going to tell the king whether there was going to be enough fertile land for crops so that he could feed his people, so that they didn't try to overthrow him.
You'd have to go a lot further back, for that sort of thing. Astrology was very popular in the 16th and 17th centuries on a middle class or even lower class level. I mean, you had people like Simon Foreman and William Lilly that were just doing 20 readings a day for people.
Oh, okay. Well, that was like medically driven too, right? Like, I'm sick. Can you heal me, right?
Yeah. Well, that's right. So that's another aspect. That's an interesting branch of astrology because it certainly has to do with people, but it could have to do with horses or dogs, right?
Mm-hmm. Or cattle and crops,
which also has to do with nature. It has to do with herbs, remedies, and stones and elements and so on. Medical astrology falls in a strange place in regard to this general distinction of what natal and also called judicial, but natal astrology and mundane astrology falls somewhere in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, my point is that you just let go of this idea that all astrology is people and charts. It's not. Okay. So once you've been able to pull yourself away from that idea, and you consider the fact that astrology has had a very long association with weather and climate in the sense of drought cycles and so on. And in earlier times there was no knowledge of the outer planets. The longest period of any planet that was known back then was Saturn at 29 years. So, and the record keeping wasn't always so great. And in order to really understand how climate works, you need to have some kind of records or some kind of way of determining how things happened in the past, say with ice cores or marine cores, things like that. So what I'm trying to get at in this talk is that the subject of climate change absolutely has a lot to do with this kind of natural astrology I'm talking about. There are things like the Milnkovic cycles. Now, this guy Milnkovic was a Serbian engineer and came up with this. It wasn't just an idea. The idea occurred before he worked on it, but he came out with the nuts and bolts of how to do it. How the planets modulate the variations in the Earth's orbit, which then changes the amount of solar radiation that hits the Earth. So the Earth goes around the sun. Sometimes it's more circular, sometimes it's more elliptical. Why? Because the planets are pulling on the Earth and moving it around. And meanwhile, there's the direction that the Earth's axis, the polar axis, points changes over 26,000 years. Called precession of the equinoxes, if you measure it by the equinoxes, but you can also measure it by the poles, where the North Pole is pointing. And that also modulates how much sunlight is falling on different parts of the Earth. And the fact that most of the landmass of the Earth is in the northern hemisphere is very significant. I mean, we have, Asia and North America. There's a huge amount of land in the northern hemisphere. And that's sucks up a lot of heat, and or it holds a lot of cold. And so, in particular, if you get snow accumulation in the northern hemisphere, it's likely to keep building if the Earth is in one part of one of these long cycles where it's getting a little less solar radiation than usual. And the ice can build up, and next thing you know, we have an ice age.
Something to look forward to.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk, among people in regard to climate change that is misleading and at a worst completely wrong. And it's propagated by a lot of conservative operations, think tanks and so on, because they have an investment in the fossil fuel industry.
Right.
And so what happens is you have these groups and organizations, and it spills down to entertainment news outlets like Fox or OAN or Newsmax. And they propagate this information that it's the sun that's driving the climate, and people don't have anything to do with it. But that's not really how it works out. And what they do is they seize on any uncertainties that scientists, will show as evidence that they don't know what they're talking about. Of course, scientists are rarely 100% in agreement because science is a process. It's a democratic process of trying to accumulate knowledge, and it moves slowly. Some guy comes up with an idea and says, "Hey, I think that this can fly, and here's my experiment." So then somebody else does the experiment and says, "No, it doesn't." So that gets thrown out. And then somebody else comes back and says, "Well, if you modify it this way, then it really does fly." And then the next 100 people test it out and say, "Yeah, he's right, it flies." And one person tests it out and says, "Well, I don't think it does." So now we have a situation where there's 99% say it flies and 1% doesn't. So it might take another 10 years or 20 years or 100 years for that to be sorted out. But eventually, you work out all the details, and you've got something that's that is as close to a fact as you're going to get.
Mm-hmm.
And climate change is one of these areas that's not simple because it deals with the system. And we try to get records from the past in unique ways by drilling cores in the bottom of the ocean or in ice, glaciers.
Mm-hmm.
And we analyze in the glaciers. We analyze little bubbles in the ice that are trapped pieces of the atmosphere at the time that it snowed to form that ice.
Mm-hmm.
And then we could take those little tiny amounts of atmosphere and determine what the percentage of carbon dioxide was in it.
Mm-hmm.
And we can find these periods where there's a lot of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and then there's not a lot. So a lot is known, but it's known after excruciatingly complex investigations of things like ice cores and marine cores and corals. There are a number of it's called proxy data.
Mm-hmm.
Tree ring.
Mm-hmm.
You have something that's a proxy for the weather back 10,000 years ago or 1,000,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And and they can go pretty far back with these long-term orbital cycles. In fact, New Jersey is one place where some very ancient records are found. I think you can go back something like 200 million years, and some of these layers of rock in New Jersey, and find that there were these cycles of wetness and dryness that were lasting about 23,000 years each.
Wow, it's better than finding a Superfund site.
Yeah, that's right. You got to drill through the rock for this one.
Right.
But I was pleased to find that some of the oldest records of astronomically driven climate were found in New Jersey.
Right. Interesting.
So I'm saying this is a kind of astrology. We have planets are pulling on the Earth's orbit, and it's modulating how much sunlight the Earth gets at different, in the northern hemisphere largely, but in different parts of the globe.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have an effect on the climate. So, my question is, doesn't that fit the definition of natural astrology? Sure looks like it to me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so here we are at a time in our history where this stuff is extremely important because it has to do with our climate. And we have a climate crisis going on.
Right.
In case you haven't noticed.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in Jersey, since Hurricane Sandy, I think we've all noticed,
Yeah, I think things like the fact that spring comes earlier, the leaves turn color 2 weeks later now here in Western Massachusetts than they did when I moved here in 1989.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's obvious.
Right.
The weather is very unstable in the spring now, at least
right
here. And we have like, a couple days of summer, and then we go back into winter again.
Yeah, same here in Jersey, and I think in the New York area, at least in the New York City area. But yeah, it's like the buds start to come out, and then they go away,
Yeah.
And then it's like the plants are totally confused, which I would assume makes some of the animals confused.
Yeah. What happens is
so
the plants are largely driven by what's called photoperiod, and that's the ratio of the length of day to the length of night.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is also the big factor in the zodiac, the tropical zodiac.
Mm-hmm.
But so the plants are following the light cycle largely. The insects are following, trying to follow the plants, but they also depend a lot on the weather. Both do. And when you have these unstable weather situations, you have plants blooming, at a time that's not convenient for the insects to fertilize, to pollinate.
Right.
So we have a little bit of chaos going on, and there are studies now that are showing how fast animals are evolving to deal with these changes. It's even more complex when you get into higher latitudes, like in England.
Mm-hmm.
It's got much more northerly, latitude than we do.
Right, right,
You're at 40. England's at like 50.
right,
England's
right.
the equivalent to like Labrador and Newfoundland.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's pretty far north, especially when you get above that, you're getting into like Scotland. I remember learning that uh, Scotland, I'm an MS patient, and one of the things that they used to say 20 plus years ago, I don't know if they still say it now, they've amended it slightly, is that if you lived or born or lived within a certain proximity to the equator, you would not develop this kind of autoimmune disease. And that there was a book that came out at the time by a stewardess, was just a personal memoir. Um, and the statistic she quoted was that there were the highest, like the rate, the farther away from you get from the equator, either north or south, the rate of diagnosis doubles. So when you get like from southern US to the northern US, it's double in the north. And when you get from the northern US to Canada, it's double again. So Scotland happened to be the place where there was the highest rate of diagnosis, at least then, because
Yeah.
it was so far north, away from the equator. But let me,
Yeah, it's obviously a photo period factor right there. It's
right.
obviously, and things like, this is all related to things like jet lag and seasonal, affect disorder and so on.
Right, exactly, exactly. But let me ask you, if we're looking at what we know, or at least I assume most of us listening to you understand what you said about the backlash against factual scientific climate change that's happening and has, now and has been happening versus the astrological cycles that are going on now. Like, are you willing or able to make any kind of not prediction but just forecast for the future? Will we actually be able to rally enough to halt the progression of climate change, or are we pretty much doomed to just watch Mother Earth continue to be ravaged, and we'll all just, if not each of us personally now, depending on our individual age and stage of life, know that it's going to affect our children and our grandchildren?
Well, we'll see if there are enough intelligent people, running the show, that if we can get through it. I mean, there's incredible stupidity out there, and I think what it is a revolution is taking place for sure, and it's driven by technology. The innovations in technology in the last 100 years are mind-boggling,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
and these are being applied to a species that just learned agriculture 10,000 years ago, but has
When you put
been
it that way, it's funny. Yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
but has been, more or less the way we are today for about 200,000 years, and has been human-like for 7 million years,
Mm-hmm.
right? So this last 100 years is like, it's like a little tiny, tiny piece of time in a much longer, history. And I think adapting to that and adjusting to it is extremely stressful. It's just put just tremendous pressure on the species. We have to keep adjusting our social norms, and there are a lot of people, particularly the conservative type. I mean, first of all, there are two fundamental temperamental predispositions that some psychologists have argued, Jerome Kagan in particular, that they come at birth, and that it may be just part of the species trying to make sure that it has a little bit of both. But you have, there's tolerance for risk, and then there's fear,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you're born more fear oriented, you're gonna be inclined to be more conservative about at least some things.
Right.
And if you're tolerant of risk, you'll take more chances, and you'll be more open-minded and tolerant of change in the future, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
right now, what we have is those who are affected more by a fearful view of the world are having, like a brain seizure. I mean, it's just things are just happening too fast. And that's
Right.
why
Right.
there's this movement towards authoritarianism, because at least it's predictable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And So the fact that there's this, big reaction, these days says to me that, yeah, what change is really happening, it's happening fast. So I think it's going to happen. I think that there's going to be a big, messy transition. It's not as neat and efficient as it could be because it's like we're all in this boat together and, at least 1/3 of the boat is drilling holes in the bottom, because they don't want to go anywhere. And they're not thinking. It's a panic reaction.
Right. So they're not realizing they're going to sink the boat.
Yeah. So another third have to try to work with those people to get them to stop. And then that leaves 1/3 left with, trying to like sail the thing.
Right. Wow.
So
what a great
not,
metaphor.
yeah. It's not a smooth period, but I think there'll be a lot of change. Some of it might not be too good. I mean, the fact that Pluto is moving into Aquarius very soon next year.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about that. Yep.
Well, I mean, it's hopeful in one sense. I mean, it'll certainly, I think bring an end to, this wave of authoritarianism that's going on. Not that it'll be instantly, ended, but I think it'll be it'll promote a lot. It's more in line with the technological and the social changes that we see going on. So I think we're going to turn a corner. And I think that we will probably by 2030 have a lot of electric cars, and there'll be a lot of alternative energy, and maybe we will be able to reduce, fossil fuel burning considerably. All we got to do is, if we cut it in half, that would be, real progress.
Would be something. Well, do you think that you, based on what you know, will that be too little, too late, or no?
Oh, I think it's already too late. I mean,
right.
But I don't think. Right. But I think that if nothing is done for the next 50 years, we're definitely doomed.
Right.
But I think things are going to be done. I think that that bully Vladimir Putin is actually doing the world a favor. He's in one sense, he's pushing Europe in particular to go green.
Right. Of course, I thought that from the beginning with all this stuff about the oil and the liquefied natural gas or whatever coming out of Russia. Yeah. So it's ending that dependency on fossil fuels in general. Yeah, absolutely.
You need to, the fossil fuel thing is absolutely ridiculous because it takes like 1 million years to, for all these life forms, organisms to decay and form coal or oil, right? And then that 1 million years is like burned off in 1 year by humans.
Right.
So the transfer of carbon from the atmosphere to the Earth that happens naturally takes 1 million years. It takes humans a year to transfer it from the Earth to the air. Insane.
Yep. That's like saying, whatever you do doesn't matter, right? If you're baking a cake, it's going to take you an hour to bake it or 2 hours to get everything together and then bake it, and then it takes 5 seconds to glom it down, right?
Yeah, we're all connected. Everything is all connected now, and it's a very complicated world, and a lot of people are afraid of it.
Yep.
And
but you're saying,
and the other thing that plays into it is religion to a large extent. I mean, the idea that man is some kind of special species, and is unique from the animal kingdom and from the world in general, that's got to go.
Well, I think, with the movement of Pluto into Aquarius, I don't know, based on some of what you've said, if you would agree that that's a far less religious. It can be group oriented, right? But if we're moving into the age of Aquarius, and astrologer Stephen Forrest makes the argument, he has for a long time, that with all of the technological advancements made since the turn of the century, including going from the horse and buggy to the car, and from the car to putting a man on the moon, that we're already at the beginning of the age of Aquarius. We're not really sitting around waiting for it to start. But I'm wondering also if you foresee anything, and we got about 8 minutes left, so I want to ask you one or two other quick questions. But, the giving up, because a lot of what we've been talking about in terms of preventing climate change, action to deter climate change or negative climate change, is political. With Pluto moving out of Capricorn, do you think we'll see a lessening of corporate influence, or is that?
Oh yeah, I think so. I think there'll be some big changes because the writing is on the wall. You know, it's one of these situations where a lot of people knew this was happening for the last 30 years, and then a lot of people fought it tooth and nail. But it's getting too obvious. And when you get, you know, big corporations that are concerned about their bottom line and they realize, you know, they're shooting themselves in the foot by, you know, burning all this fossil fuel, they're changing.
Right. And so we might see.
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Well, I think we're going to see governments change. We're going to see corporations change, and you know, people will change. It's the motion. It's already in motion. It's a little late. There's going to be a lot of damage from weather events. You know, we're going to have some pretty fierce hurricanes, I'm sure, and the climate system is destabilized. I'm going to talk all about this and how it's regulated by the sun and the moon and the planets, you know, on Sunday. But
yeah, so cool.
But I think there's some hope. There is some hope.
Okay, because one of the things I was going to say, well, you just mentioned it, but it's you know, what I was just talking about in my remarks earlier, which is on the political level, right? Like these politicians are going to have to get with the program because, you know, eventually people, you know, well, I mean, right now, and we don't know if it'll dissipate or not. There's a lot of emotional outreach to say, you know, it's not a matter of if your child is going to die in a shooting, you know, it's just when, you know. Because it's coming, and you know, if you're lucky, you'll escape it. But don't assume that, you know.
We also have to hold certain news organizations and certain individuals that propagate what are basically false information accountable. They have
don't even get me started on that, Bruce. We'll have you back, and we can have a whole hour of that, you know, because yeah, clearly, you know. But let me ask you too, because I know that, or you told me recently that you're working on a new book, and that one came out, I think it was last year, right? So tell us about that. First, I'll just remind everyone so I don't run out of time. aspnj.org. If you're interested in Bruce's lecture, because I know I'll be there. So if you go to that webpage, you can just sign up right there. The other thing with ASP, just to put in a little plug, it's $35 a year to become a new member, and then it's $5 for their Zoom lectures. If you don't join, it's $40 per lecture. So if you're going to attend 2 lectures, and Rob Hand, you know, comes every month, they get excellent speakers. So, you know, it's well worth it. So aspnj.org. But tell us about your books and, you know, where people can find the one that's out and what's up with this new one.
Yeah. Well, many years ago, back in I guess the early 80s, I wrote like a small pamphlet called Some Facts About Astrology, and then I beefed it up and got it to about 40 pages. Then it was called, you know, Astrology for Open Minds or something like that. And then I made it, got it up to about 100 pages, and I called it User's Guide to Astrology. And then I printed that a few times. And then I worked on it a couple of years ago and got it up to over 200 pages, added some new information, brought it all up to date. And Margaret at Wessex Astrologer in England there wanted to publish it. So we changed the title to What Astrology Is and What Astrology Is and How to Use It. And which I think is a great title because that's what it is. It's basically my introduction to astrology. It could serve as a textbook. It could serve as an introduction. It's like it shows you what to do, where to look for astrology, what an astrologer does, history of astrology, how to read a chart yourself, all sorts of things on it.
That's fabulous.
It's a potpourri of information. So she's selling it now. I mentioned it on Facebook the other day, but it came out this year, I guess.
And is it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble?
Yeah, it's on Amazon. Yeah, you can get it any of those.
I'm going there when we get off this call and getting myself a copy.
Yeah, I think it's my best general purpose astrology book. Now, the other book that I worked on, I'm done. It's going to be published by Inner Traditions in December, and December 20th it comes out. It's called The Nature of Astrology, and it's built off my PhD thesis, which is called History and Test of Planetary Weather Forecasting. I did it for the Geosciences Department at the University of Massachusetts. So I took that thesis and I worked it, and I basically added a lot of new information. And it's a long 500-page work on the origins of how. Well, first of all, it starts off by saying that there are so many factors, cosmic factors, working on us: sun, moon, planets, and so on, that are known. There's no question about it. That we need to understand them, and there's a section on biology and a section on weather and climate. And then I go into the origins of astrology in Mesopotamia and in other cultures a little bit. And then I talk about astrometeorology, like I was talking about earlier. And then I present the results of my own studies of how Saturn actually can be shown to have a correlation with cold weather in certain parts of the world. So it's not just the sun and moon; the planets might be doing something. And then I go into this, long section about how astrology got to the place that it's at today. When, early on it was very respected, and it had a resurgence in the Renaissance. And there's a lot of philosophy, there's a lot of history of science, there's a lot of social history. And then the last section, I talk about the evidence for astrology, what astrologers believe, I talk about theories in astrology, which is something hardly is ever discussed. I have a section called marginalized, why astrology is marginalized. And then I have a lot of suggestions about, where it might go.
Wow.
The overall theme of the book is that is my definition of astrology. Which is astrology is a set of mapping techniques for self-organizing systems.
Okay, listen, we are out of time, but I'm going to ask you if you will come back when that book is either about to be published or published, so we can talk more about it. I'm sorry, what month? December. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to hit you up for a date. Okay, either one. And Bruce, thank you so much for coming on with me today. This has been fascinating. I am encouraging everyone to sign up for that lecture this Sunday. So please do. And, I hope to see you all there. So thanks to everyone and to Bruce for joining us today. I hope you found the information presented here helpful as you continue your karmic evolution in this lifetime. Please be sure to join me next week on June 16th. Until then, may your journey be filled with karmic healing and the joy of greater consciousness. Namaste.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come.